The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. First of all, please excuse the mess as I'm currently under renovations with this room and currently trying to fix some old toys of mine. Poor Mega Man. This book, the unabridged version, is so fucking long. You want to know when I started this book? I started it in the fall of 2011. And I just finished it this past March. Now, of course, that wasn't the only book that I was reading the entire time. I got distracted with other stuff, and then I was reading stuff in between, and so if you want to read this, you need to really focus on it, especially if it's the unabridged version. When I first got a copy of The Count of Monte Cristo, I didn't realize that it was abridged, and I was like, oh, motherfucker, I don't read, the shortened versions. I don't play easy mode. I want to go all the way. But then as I was reading, I was like, maybe the abridged version wasn't a bad idea. Not because it's, too long or... Well, okay, here's the thing. Count of Monte Cristo had a great opening, great beginning. And by beginning, I mean, the first 200, 300 pages, I think, were, awesome, amazing. It just goes by. And then in the middle, it's just... nothing happens for maybe, 300 more pages or something. And it just gets... It's blah, 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 just on and on and on. But the way it ends, it just all comes together. It's just all at once, just like that. And you're like, whoa. Everything makes sense now. And... it was unfortunate because I kind of wasn't paying attention to some of the details in the middle, because like I said, the middle was boring, and so some things in the end finally tie back into stuff that happened in the middle, and I was like, oh wait, what happened again? In case you don't know, Count of Monte Cristo is probably one of the most, classic, archetypal, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word right, because I never said it in conversation before, but, in other words, what I mean to say is, a lot of plot elements that we use now come from The Count of Monte Cristo. And The Count of Monte Cristo is a classic story about Edmond Dantes, who's, he's a great sailor, and everything's going good for him. Everything's going well for him. And he has 3 jealous friends who decide to, fool around with fate, and they forge a letter having to, because this deals heavily, very heavily, on the historical background, because it's Alexander Dumas, and Alexander Dumas might just as well give you a history lesson on everything that's going on in the 1800s, along with the story that he wants to tell you. So, pretty much they frame Dantes for being involved with Napoleon, and then Dantes gets in trouble, he gets arrested, and the prosecutor realizes that if he... lets him free, then it's gonna... It ties it, because he's the prosecutor was corrupt and stuff, and he was just trying to save his own ass. So then Dantes gets sent to jail, and then he meets an old man who says, oh, I know where secret treasure is, but everyone thinks I'm crazy because I'm old, and I've been here for God knows how much. So Dantes helps him, and then he finds the gold, and then uses that gold. The bulk of the story is Dantes getting back at those 3 friends, well, 4 people, because he's also getting back at the prosecutor. So it's this really, Dumas is kind of like a genius trying to craft all this together, and that's the thing. Also in the middle of the book, it's just Dantes having already gained his wealth, and now he's a count and stuff, and he's just going to France, and he's just settling in, and that part is basically where it gets, because then you really start getting to the whole French society, and it's kind of oh yes, we're French, blah 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 blah, let's do French things, and so it's okay, that kind of drills on for 300 pages or so, and then another thing that I find somewhat annoying about this book is that everyone has the unnatural ability to suddenly remember every single detail about an anecdote. For example, one of his servants tells a story about how his brother, I think, died at the hands of the same prosecutor or something like that, and he goes on this whole story, but then I was like, you know, it's written as if his servant is like talking about all of this, and he's just like, and then this guy said this and this and that and this and that and this. Like in real life, you couldn't possibly be talking for that long. Like in real life, you just say, "Oh yeah, my brother got killed because of that guy, and that guy's a douche, and now I want revenge." And you know, it'd be summed up in like no more than like maybe 2 pages or so. But no, this is like on and on and on and on and on. And that's the thing about Dumas. Dumas goes like all out, like the most detailed. It's probably the most detailed writer I've ever like known. He just and like I wonder if he wrote. I think he wrote plays because he writes scenes as if he's setting up a play. You know, he's talking about like for example in the courtyard scene, all the flowers and things like that, and the gate and like what everything looks like. It's like so fucking detailed to the most insane degree of just yeah. And you know, it's on one hand it's like really colorful and stuff, on the other hand it's like, okay, come on, let's keep it moving. I wouldn't really call it an adventure story because I've never seen any film adaptation, but you know, I've seen some like old movie poster and it's like the greatest adventure ever told. I wouldn't really call it an adventure. I mean, I don't know what people who haven't read it think about it before, because you know how you have your own impression before you read something. There's like no duels. There's like no actual fighting, you could say, in the story. I mean, there's like a couple flashbacks of fighting, and there's a good escape scene with this one guy, where he's trying to escape the police, and he like runs around this hotel and like climbs up a chimney and stuff. That was good, but like there's no actual like adventuring sort of. It's just more like a family drama / suspense, revenge / story. So it's kind of a mix. It's just like a drama with like revenge and like, you know, that kind of tension going on. It's definitely great. It's definitely, you should probably, if you're okay, here's the thing. Here's my bottom line. If you really like to read books, then you should definitely read this. If you just, you know, read a book here and there just for the sake of reading, maybe you could skip it. Maybe you could just do the abridged version, because, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you can really skip over. I can tell why they have an abridged version, because there are some chapters where there's just almost just history and just Dumas putting the background on what's going on. It's like, oh, this has nothing to do with, well, I mean, it has somewhat to do with Edmond Dantes, but I mean, in this particular story, it has nothing to do with Edmond Dantes right now. Like, there are parts where I'm like, okay, shut up. What happened to Dantes? I want to know. That's pretty much all I care about right now. I want to see the movie, like the latest movie with Guy Pearce in it. I don't know how that's like. I don't know how they would do. They'd probably have to cut down a lot, because I can't imagine how they would put all of this into like a 2-hour or so movie. But so there we go. This is probably the longest book I've read so far. This was like 1,000, almost 1,200. It's like 1,170 something pages, but it was good. It was very good. It was definitely, it's one of those things that's going to stay in my mind for a while, probably my whole life. One of those inspirational, crappy stuff. But yeah, here we go. Dumas also likes to make a lot of references to things that no one knows about anymore. I mean, obviously we don't know about that now. I mean, back then people probably knew what he was talking about, so I guess what I mean to say is a lot of his references are very archaic and obscure right now, because he definitely must have written plays, because he's always like, oh, and so just like this guy in this play, Dantes was, and it's like, okay, alright, I don't know what you're talking about, but okay, that's cool, I guess. And yeah, I mean, the middle part, it wasn't boring, there were some funny parts. It's just, when the Count arrives in France, you know, he's kind of peculiar compared to the rest of French society, so everyone's interested in him. He's like, oh, he's like, he knows all this exotic stuff, and he's peculiar, and blah, 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 and he's new in town, and things like that. And, you know, he kind of does like these almost like silly little douchebaggery tricks on his friends. And at first I thought it was going to be like that the entire book. I was like, oh, is this like the count of my dick in your face? Like, is it just going to be that the entire time? Like, oh, look at all the money I have. I'm fucking around with you and making you waste money and things like that. But no, it gets like it reaches a conflict like in a steep hill. It's just like bam, people start dying. Like that's when you know that shit's gonna go down for real. When people start dying, and they start dying one by one.